The book of Micah is a deeply emotional and evocative narrative that contains a mixture of sharp warnings, heartfelt laments, and hopeful promises. Set during the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, Micah prophesies at a time when both Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom, are plagued by corruption, idolatry, and social injustice. Micah's message is one of impending judgment tempered by future restoration. Driven by God's deep desire for justice, mercy, and faithfulness among his people. The opening warning. God's judgment on Samaria and Jerusalem. Micah begins with a dramatic and poetic vision of God descending from his holy temple to judge the earth. The imagery is vivid. Mountains melt like wax, and valleys split as God treads upon the high places of the earth. This grand scene sets the tone for the coming judgment, emphasizing God's power and righteousness. Micah's prophecy begins with an indictment against Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. He declares that the city will be destroyed for its idolatry and rebellion against God. Samaria's sins, which include worshiping foreign gods and exploiting the poor, will result in its utter devastation. Micah specifically mentions the city being reduced to a heap of rubble and its idols being smashed. Following the judgment on Samaria, Micah shifts his focus to Jerusalem, the capital of Judah. Though Judah has not yet fallen into the same depths of idolatry as Israel, Micah warns that it is on the same path. The leaders and people of Judah are guilty of oppressing the poor, bribing officials, and relying on false prophets who proclaim peace when there is none. Corruption in the leadership and society. A major theme in Micah is the corruption of Israel and Judah's leaders. Micah singles out the rulers, priests, and prophets for leading the people astray. The rulers are condemned for perverting justice, using their positions to enrich themselves at the expense of the vulnerable. The rich are said to lie awake at night plotting how to seize fields and houses from the poor, acts that violate the covenantal laws given by God. The priests, who are supposed to guide the people spiritually, have become corrupt, offering religious guidance only for payment. Meanwhile, the prophets, who claim to speak for God, have become false prophets, offering false assurances of peace in exchange for money. These leaders have betrayed their God-given responsibilities, leading the nation into sin. God's lament and the coming punishment. Micah not only delivers a message of judgment, but he also reflects God's deep sorrow over his people's unfaithfulness. In chapter 1, the prophet laments the coming disaster, speaking as if it is already unfolding before his eyes. He mourns over the destruction of towns and cities, describing the approach of the enemy as unstoppable. Gan, the sins of the people have made their punishment inevitable. Micah warns that Jerusalem will fall unless they turn from their wicked ways. This prediction of Jerusalem's destruction shocks many, as the city is seen as the dwelling place of God, the site of the temple. But Micah makes it clear that God's presence will not shield them from judgment if they continue to defy him. Hope amidst the darkness. The promise of restoration. Despite the darkness of judgment, Micah offers a powerful vision of hope and future restoration. In chapters 4 and 5, Micah presents a beautiful prophecy of a time when Zion, Jerusalem, will be lifted up as the center of God's kingdom. In this future, all nations will come to Jerusalem to learn God's ways and walk in his paths. This is a vision of peace, where nations will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Micah 4:3, a powerful symbol of the end of warfare and conflict. The promise of a Messiah is one of the most famous aspects of Micah's prophecy. In chapter 5, Micah foretells the coming of a ruler from the small town of Bethlehem, a ruler who will lead Israel in righteousness and peace. This ruler, from the lineage of David, will shepherd God's people and establish a kingdom of justice and security. Christians later interpret this prophecy as referring to the birth of Jesus Christ, who would bring spiritual salvation to the world. What God requires: justice, mercy, and humility. In chapter 6, Micah presents a legal dispute, as if God is taking Israel to court for breaking his covenant. God challenges Israel, asking them what he has done to deserve their betrayal, reminding them of his past faithfulness and deliverance from Egypt. The people in response ask what they can offer to please God. Should they bring sacrifices, burnt offerings, or even their firstborn children? Micah's response is one of the most famous verses in the Bible. He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Micah 6:8. This verse encapsulates the heart of God's desires for his people, not elaborate religious rituals, but a life of ethical integrity, kindness, and humility before God. Micah's message is that God seeks righteousness in daily life, and the people must turn away from injustice and oppression to truly follow him. The final hope: God's mercy and forgiveness. Yam. The book concludes with a profound message of hope and forgiveness. Although the people have sinned, God's nature is to show mercy. In chapter 7, Micah speaks of a future where God will gather his people from exile, where he will tread their sins underfoot and cast them into the depths of the sea. This final vision reflects God's covenantal love and faithfulness, and Micah expresses his confidence in God's ultimate plan of redemption. Micah closes by praising God's enduring love and faithfulness. Despite the judgment that is to come, Micah reminds the people that God is a God of compassion, slow to anger and abounding in love. He will remember his promises to Abraham, Jacob, and their descendants, and he will restore his people in the end. Conclusion. The book of Micah presents a stark warning against corruption, injustice, and idolatry, but it is also a powerful message of hope. Micah calls the people to return to the values of justice, mercy, and humility, reminding them that God is faithful even when his people are not. Though judgment is imminent, God's love and mercy endure, and his ultimate plan is one of redemption, peace, and restoration for those who turn back to him.